When you're trapped inside of your own body, every second feels like an hour, and every minute feels like a day.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 141 of the Strokecast. Today's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Modus Nova. To find out if Modus Nova can help you recover the use of an affected limb, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. And by the fine folks at Like-Minded. To find out if the Like-Minded program can help you in your post-stroke life, visit strokecast.com/like-minded. Today, we talk with stroke survivor and pageant queen, Jeri Ward, also known as Mrs. Ohio International. I met Jeri through her Instagram account as Mrs. Ohio International, and you can find the link to that in the show notes, of course. I talked with Jeri just days prior to the Mrs. International pageant. I'll share the results after our conversation. Recently, Jeri also played a role in passing legislation in Ohio requiring ambulances to take stroke patients to the most appropriate hospital rather than the nearest one, along with helping to revise other EMS standards related to stroke care. So now, let's meet Jeri Ward. So Jeri, thanks so much for joining us on Strokecast this week.
Thank you for having me. It is a blessing and an honor to be here with you today.
Oh, well, and I absolutely appreciate that. I know your time is super valuable, especially this week in the days leading up to the big pageant.
Absolutely. I just arrived at home, so ironically enough, the pageant is just a few minutes from my hometown. So it feels good to be home and in my safe place. But yeah, I start pageant week this upcoming week. And so this is the final week of preparation and beautiful chaos that ensues prior to pageant.
I love that phrase, beautiful chaos.
Yes, that is pretty much life post-stroke.
Very much so. So, well, I guess let's get started with what was your life like before your stroke?
It was wonderful, chaotic, but wonderful. I was a social worker. I was a crisis therapist. I was incredibly involved in my community, maybe a little bit too much so. But I found that I am truly, truly a humanist. And so I would constantly be giving to everyone at all times. And I found that I was neglecting myself a lot because you are only one person and you only have so much time in your day to be able to give to other people. And so I would neglect myself, put myself on the back burner a little bit, although I was working out every day, super healthy, in shape. I just wasn't taking time to rest and kind of refill my cup.
And if you don't take time to refill your cup, you can't really fill anybody else's from it.
Correct. Yeah. Well, and you can try. You can give it a valiant effort. But I think at the end of the day, you can only give someone the best version of you if you are at your best. And so a lot of times I think we are trying to run on the empty tank. And although that is coming from a good place, we want to have a tank to run from at the end of the day. And so I think this whole situation for me, life post-stroke and life pre-stroke, has just really been about prioritizing my life better.
Often when we talk about that idea of making sure you're able to refill your cup and rebuild that energy, a lot of times we talk about that also in the context of our caregivers. And because when we encounter that stroke, suddenly, the other people in our lives who care about us have to find themselves in the position of taking care of us at a level they've never done before. And it's so important to remember for them to remember that, yes, they're going through trauma too. They need a break. They need their own support system, and they need to take care of themselves. Put your own mask on before helping others.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it's about. And I think that's a little easier said than done, especially for caregivers, because everyone in that situation is just trying to survive versus thrive. And it's really just about in that moment, just trying to manage what can we do to get to this next second. I actually had a conversation, I guess, night before last. I had a frantic wife who I obviously did not know at the time, or her husband. She called me at about 11 p.m. and she was just bawling her eyes out. And she was like, I got your name, I got your number from someone, and they said that you could help. And I was like, help what? Like that's a really, really big job and position to be in, is when someone is desperate and you're trying to figure out how you can help, right?
Right.
But her husband had a massive stroke and brain bleed, and she is a wife of the husband, obviously, and then the 3 little kids under the age of 13. And she was like, my husband, they said he wouldn't make it. He's finally out of the ICU. He's in an inpatient facility. He cannot do anything. He cannot speak. He still has a tube in his throat. And, I'm just trying to manage being 45 minutes away, having 3 kids, it's summertime, and then being with my husband every day to try to encourage him as well, because he's pretty discouraged given the situation. And I told her exactly kind of what you said, is that I know it's really hard to make time for yourself right now, because you're being pulled in a bazillion different ways that are all very, very important roles in your life. But if you do not step away a little bit each day, at least 10, 15 minutes to kind of recharge yourself, you're going to end up having a stroke yourself.
Right.
And I just, I feel for people in that situation. And we talked for over an hour about some things that she could kind of do to manage the situation she's been given. But it's tough. I think being a caregiver is the hardest job in the world. I do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And having to be strong for other people when you really struggle with that yourself. And we see this again and again.
Right.
So you were living, sort of that kind of life pre-stroke. You were already Mrs. Ohio at that point. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So I just came back from Mrs. America, actually, and I was probably 3 weeks back from Mrs. America, and I had been 30 years old for almost a month as well. So I was kind of seeing it as like a chapter close. I really was. It's like, okay, I made it to my level that I wanted to be at. And I'm 30 years old. I want to dedicate more time to myself. I want to slow down on some of my activities, etc. But I guess life just really had a different idea about my slowing down pace and when that was going to happen.
Nothing will slow down your pace as suddenly as just having a stroke, and your body just says, nope, we're stopping now.
Yeah. And I mean, I was working more at a gradual pace, maybe in the next few weeks, few months. But yeah, it was definitely a game changer, because I completely lost the ability to speak, move, read, and write.
So what happened that day?
So I actually had a headache for about 5 days, and workaholic, of course, myself, I just assumed that it was stress, which probably some of it was. That wasn't uncommon for me. I was at the point in my life, and this is awful, so please don't judge me too harshly. I was at the point in my life in which I was taking headache medicine in the morning before I even had a headache to prevent the inevitable headache I was going to have later that day. So obviously, I was not caring for myself in the way that was healthy, because that is not normal to be having headaches every single day and just preparing your body by numbing it to kind of deal with that situation.
Right.
So finally, by the 5th day, I felt so sick, so nauseous. And I told my boss, I was like, I'm going home. I just can't deal with it anymore. I need to rest. So I did go home, and I took a long bath, which sometimes helps with my headaches. And then I took a long nap for about an hour or two. And then my husband and I came home from work at that point. So at around 10 p.m., I was sitting on the couch working, of course, because I missed work earlier that day and needed to catch up. And we were sitting on the couch together, and he was watching TV. He was about ready to go to bed. And I said, no, I got to stay up and finish this. And all of a sudden, I felt a bit of vertigo. It was almost like the room was spinning. It became a little bit difficult to swallow in that moment. I specifically remembered that. And once again, I just thought it was kind of weird, not a big deal. And then all of a sudden, I heard a pop in the back of my head, and my vision became blurry. And then it kind of sizzled out like the sound of a firework. And I was like, that's not good. Like, I realized at that moment, nothing in my head should be sizzling.
Right.
But I tried to move and tell my husband that I thought something was wrong, but I couldn't move or speak at all. So although I was sitting, I didn't fall down or anything or slump over on the couch. I was just screaming internally for help, for something to happen. And I was trying with all my might to move my body. And I could not move my body at all. And then after about 10 very, very long seconds, I was finally able to move my body, and I picked my laptop up and tossed it across the room. And of course, my husband was like, what the heck are you doing? We paid a lot of money for that laptop. And when I tried to speak at that moment, my words came out very, very slurred, and they didn't make sense. And honestly, I kind of giggled a little bit because I was like, what in the world is even happening? That I was cognizant, so it didn't make sense. And I knew my words were wrong. But after a few minutes, I was able to say hospital, and my husband took me to the hospital at that point.
Wow. Yeah, that's just super frustrating to be in that situation. What happened when you got to the hospital? I mean, did they take it seriously? And
yeah, well, I think I had a couple of defining moments in my stroke. One was when I arrived at the ER. So obviously, my husband and I did not realize that I was having a stroke. We just realized that something just wasn't right in that moment. So he dropped me off at the front door to the ER, and he went and parked his car. And I went to the front desk, and they said, what's going on? And my words weren't coming out exactly right. And they said, hey, could you enter in your social security number so that they could look me up in the system, right?
Sure.
So I nodded my head yes, because I know my social security number since I was like 15 years old, and I'm now 30 years old, so solid 15 years. And when I looked at the keypad, I not only did not know my social security number anymore, I also did not know what the numbers were on the keypad. And I think the nurse at the desk at that point could tell in that moment that my face must have done something that alerted her, it's okay, don't worry about it. You can just go on back. Because I think that I don't know what my face did, but that realization when I looked at the keypad and numbers that I'd known for at least 29, 28 years, I did not know that setting in was so heavy. And I kind of realized in that moment the magnitude that something was going on. So they took me back to the ER room, and obviously they took my blood pressure, which was deathly low, and I went into a CT scan. And they said, the results came back, and they let my husband, and I know that I was having a massive ischemic stroke with my main source of blood to my brain completely blocked and multiple clots in my brain as well.
Wow.
And I didn't really know what that meant, to be honest with you.
But, well, sure, you had just lost the numbers.
Yeah, well, on the top of that, when you say stroke at 30 years old, that wasn't on my bucket list.
Right.
I had no idea what that stroke really meant. Like, my grandmother had a stroke, and I'm a little bit younger than my grandmother at the time that she had her stroke. And so I understood that they said stroke, but I was like, okay, cool, let's fix that. Like, that's what they do in the ER, right? That's what they do in hospitals. They fix problems. So my initial reaction was, cool, we know what it is. That makes me feel better. Okay, now what?
Because I got stuff to do tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I have a court case tomorrow that I need to get to. I've got to finish up writing my report. Can you just maybe, know numbers and letters again? Like, let's just get back to this. And they said, we're going to have to transfer you to the next hospital to go into your brain surgery. And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean brain surgery? Like, there's no pill. There's no you can't I don't know, give me an injection of some sort. When I say I was naive to stroke, I mean I was completely naive, probably more so than the average human. And they said, the process should only take an hour for the surgery. And I was like, okay, that's just an hour. We can manage that. And they said, we're going to get an ambulance together for you, get it ready for you. And I said, oh, that's not necessary. My husband can just drive you to the next hospital. And they said, no, you cannot, you've got an IV and now we've given you medication. Legally, we have to take you in an ambulance. And I was like, it's really okay. My husband, it's right here. The hospital's only 10 minutes away. It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. And I think they looked at me in desperation for me to know the seriousness of a stroke. And they said, no, ma'am, you may die. And the weight of that statement, you think about people dying all the time, right? It's unfortunate, but it's not uncommon. It's not a foreign concept. But when someone looks directly at you, a medical professional who is there to save your life and get you to where you need to be to get that job done, looks at you and says, you may die, the weight of handling that information about yourself at 30 years old is undeniably unreal. And that was really defining moment number 2 for me, because I realized I didn't know what numbers and letters were. Cool, we can fix that. Surely that's what this entire building is made for. But that doesn't matter when you figure out that you're just trying to live. It's not even about learning numbers and letters anymore. It's about you may not be alive to attempt to learn numbers and letters anymore.
Right.
So pretty surreal moment for me.
Yeah. So they get you to the next hospital, and what are they able to do there? What sort of surgery were they doing for your multi-clot ischemic stroke at that point?
So initially, because my stroke was ischemic, so it was a clot-induced stroke, they decided they were going to do a thrombectomy.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is normal, pretty routine for ischemic stroke.
Gold standard for treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Baseline, not a big deal. They probably do way too many a day, to be honest with you.
and let's just take a moment for perspective here, as we're talking about strokes, and we're talking about not a big deal. This not a big deal thing is a neurointerventionist who is threading a catheter and basically a grabber up through the blood vessels in your groin, navigating through the entire body into the brain, finding the right branch in the arteries, grabbing a clot, and then trying to drag it all the way back out. No big deal.
No big deal. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. And what makes me feel better is although I do not understand half of that, I mean, even nearly half of that, they do. And so I felt really comfortable in the fact that they said to me, "We've done 3 of these today." And I was like, heck yeah, sounds good. Like, this isn't a first-time life-saving procedure. Like, I feel good about this moment right now. Like, once again, in my head, I'm just trying to make it through this hour and then get to my next situation, which is work. That's what's going through my head this entire time.
Right.
Like, an hour, you do this all the time, check.
You kind of want them to be a little bored.
Yeah, I sure do, especially now. But rewinding back to that moment, we had a lot of complications. Of course, I'm the complicated child in this stroke bunch. But we ran into the fact that my carotid, which is a way that they usually get to the brain through the groin, through a thrombectomy, it's completely permanently occluded.
Ooh.
And there is nothing they can do to save that main blood pathway to the brain. So, with that being said, they're finding an alternative route to my brain, which obviously, takes a little bit of time to reroute throughout the human body to get to the area of the brain you need.
Hey, Google Maps does it all the time.
You would think. Google Maps does an awful job. I would hate for Google Maps to be in charge of my brain pathways. But the issue is that my clots in my brain are so severe once they get into that area that 3.5 hours later, I'm still in surgery. And I was cognizant, obviously, the entire time, sedated, luckily.
Sure.
And I'm watching my brain on this television screen in front of me. And I'm just watching them navigate and try their hardest to pull these clots out with this little itty bitty claw machine that is going on in my brain at that moment. And in that procedure, I actually lost everything. Oh. So that was a moment that I heard my voice for the last time, the one that I had for 30 years. It was a moment that I completely lost the ability to move. And I also lost the ability to speak and read and write. So I lost everything. And just to be said, that wasn't due to them and their procedure and their work at all. That was purely due to the damage in my brain that the stroke did. That wasn't a medical issue that happened as far as staff wise.
And I think that's something a lot of folks don't realize. When you have a stroke, it's not that everything goes offline at once. A lot
Correct.
will, but it's a process that takes hours as various nerve cells starve and die.
Yeah. And I think that I read at some point that it's almost 1 million cells per minute that are dying.
Yeah.
And so obviously this was 3 hours. And so the damage had been done. There was no recouping. You can, unfortunately, we haven't got to the medical situation, the miracle of just recouping brain cells on spot for an individual. We're not there yet. But I was in that moment lying there, only able to move my eyes. And I didn't know what the time frame was because it's a little hazy when someone is literally in your brain. And you're just trying to like be patient and figure out what's going on and you can't speak. But the dye that they were putting in my brain to kind of light up the clots and light up the pathways, that dye was so painful. And I couldn't tell them that it hurt. I couldn't tell them that it needed more medication. I couldn't tell them anything. And so my body naturally just started crying. And so I was just bawling my eyes out on this operating table while they're in my brain. And the nursing anesthetist came over and she actually held my hand for almost 2 hours during that procedure. So shout out to medical professionals who are more than just professionals. They're also humans, because that was a very, very human moment. And that helped me to feel a lot better. But my physician also, neurosurgeon, actually looked down on me and he was like, I just want you to remember that you're planted, not buried. He was like, I realize that in this moment you feel super buried, but it's going to be okay and you're just planted. And that was another one of those defining moments for me of, man, this is serious. This is a lot more serious than, like, I thought we were going to be in and out in an hour and I could be back to work. And this went one step further of, not only am I trying to survive, I have people inside of my brain right now as I'm sitting here, lying here, I guess. And I can't communicate. I can only move my eyes. What am I going to do?
Wow. So you're going through this procedure, trying to navigate this world, being locked in now. This is when we talk about locked in syndrome. That's sort of what that is. You're thinking, you're feeling, and you can't connect that to the outside world except sort of with your eyes.
Right.
So after the surgery, how long were you sort of locked in like that? And sort of what was that experience and that recovery like? Because, I mean, it's astounding just the level of recovery you've made.
Yeah, I fear that sometimes people look at me now, stroke survivors, that is, they look at me now and they become discouraged because I worry that they may be like, oh, she didn't have a stroke that was as severe as mine. So I can't relate to that individual because I'm so far away from where she is. And I try to tell people all the time that this was a hard hard and frustrating journey. This was awful. Like, I don't know how to explain that to people other than that. This was the worst. It truly was. But for me, I was obviously in the ICU for weeks. I lived there. I became best friends with the doctors and nurses and OT and PT and everyone else because I saw them every single day for 24 hours a day for weeks. But despite becoming really good at charades later on in my recovery, because I obviously couldn't speak, I was really trapped in my body for weeks. And you have a lot of time to think when all you can do is think. And it's a really surreal feeling when you're looking around and everyone is living. And you're just kind of in a state of being. There's no living to your life. And, you know, they told my husband that if I made it out of the first procedure, I probably wouldn't make it out of the first procedure, is what he was initially told, due to the severity of my damage. Obviously, no one told me that.
Sure.
I was gung-ho on, like, let's get this done. Let's get out of here. So my husband has a very different stroke story than even I do for the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did make it out, that was great, right? But they told my husband that at that point, she will likely be in a vegetative state forever. So we had been married for a year, 1 year. And I always joke with him and I tell him that I was just testing out his vows, you know, the in sickness and in health part. Mm-hmm. Just to see how serious he was. He doesn't find that funny. But you got to find humor in stroke where and when you can.
Absolutely.
So poor guy was kind of navigating seeing me only really able to move my eyes, etc. And here I am lying in my ICU bed thinking, I have to be able to do life again. This cannot be my life forever. I don't know what I'm going to have to do, but I got to figure it out because this is not okay with me. And although that is not how it works, your body kind of dictates that, of course. I do believe that there is some truth to believing that you can and mustering up the courage and the dedication and the perseverance to being able to try your hardest even when it feels like there's no hope.
I've described that as the right attitude is a necessary condition for recovery, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't
Correct.
guarantee you're going to get better, but if you don't have the right attitude, then you're simply not going to get better.
Yeah. It's hard. It's incredibly difficult. And when you're trapped inside of your own body, every second feels like an hour and every minute feels like a day. And you have to at least want to believe in something. I would imagine that it is so easy to fall into a place of despair and this is my life. This is what it is. This is just how it's going to be. You know, everything I worked for my entire life, all the degrees I got, all the work I did, all of the work that I have left to do that I want to do is just gone. And I feel like it's easy in that moment to fall into that place. But if you do not believe in yourself, even if it's just a glimmer of hope, then how in the world is anyone else supposed to believe in yourself? Because that self-efficacy is everything. when it comes to stroke. And you will have days, you will have moments, you will have weeks where you see no progress at all. And it is so, so disheartening. But you have to always live for hope for the next moment. That's what stroke recovery is all about.
And while you're going through that, while you're trying to fight off the despair and that experience too, I imagine that's also got to be not only extremely frustrating, but incredibly boring too.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought a lot. I thought a lot. You're just watching the world happen around you. It's really like the Twilight Zone. You're just spinning and spinning and spinning. And then someone comes and pokes and prods you. And then you have another test. And then everyone is talking about your recovery because you can't talk about your recovery. And you can't talk about your plan of care. And I mean, yeah, you're just lying there hoping that your caregiver knows what kind of movies and songs you like so that you can have some sort of like positive experience that day. And luckily I did. My husband knows me probably better than I know myself. But not everyone, that isn't the case for everyone.
Right.
And my heart aches for people that are in that situation when they do not have that strong support system.
So then you're going through this and you eventually make it out of the ICU and start the holy trinity of therapy, the PT, OT, and SLP. So how long was that process? What was it like getting your movement back and getting your language back?
It was the most amazing and frustrating process in the world. Because you remember what your voice sounded like before. You remember how much you took your voice and your abilities for granted before and just assumed that they were part of the package deal. It's frustrating because you know everything in your mind. So you're completely cognizant. You know how words sound. You know what they're supposed to sound like. You know what you're supposed to say next, etc. But you are completely unable to kind of manage that. And so I just really started to focus on celebrating everything, the super small moments. The moment that I could write the letter A again. My husband and my speech therapist actually brought me preschool workbooks and flashcards. So here I was 30 years old learning from preschool workbooks again, which is kind of, demeaning, but that's okay. You got to meet yourself where you are in that moment. And so when I could recognize and write the word A, that was a big moment. I felt like I won the lottery. I really did. And when I could, we were practicing sounds, and when I worked from 1-syllable words to 2-syllable words, and then finally up to 4-syllable words, every single step of that process was amazing. And it truly was magical watching the miracle that is a human body kind of recoup and the neuroplasticity that the brain does on its own. It's just fascinating to watch this big kid learn all over again for the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a parent, but I imagine that is a lot like when you're watching a child learn. And I remember parents getting so excited when kids could take their first steps. And I was like, okay, we do that every day, right? But when I could take a first step again, or, oh man, when I could walk up a stair, not stairs, multiple, but a stair, I was so proud of myself. I felt like I had succeeded and like I was going to get all better because of that one little progress. But I threw a lot. I threw a lot of things. I remember when I was first learning how to chew and swallow again, and I could eat real food. I passed my chewing and swallowing test. And
That's a big day.
That was the gold mine because I'd love to eat. So I felt a little more normal in that moment. But I could have my first real food. I took a bite, and my first bite, I bit the side of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had dysarthria, and I was so mad that I took my entire tray and just threw it. So once again, I don't want everyone to think I'm all grace over here. and that, because I do pageants and because I'm where I am now, that, the whole beauty and grace statement, when you're having a stroke, you're just trying to manage. There is no how to do this, and there is no right or wrong way. The right or wrong way is just trying your hardest.
Right. And you kind of end up just having to, for a while at least, you just sort of give up on anything grace related when you're using a bedside commode with like two nurses there helping you. And it's like, yeah, I mean, here we are. Whatever. Let's just get through whatever now. Yeah.
I mean, my husband had to help me to shower forever because I couldn't, walk or use my arms or my hands or anything. And even before that, the nurses had to bathe me, aka wipe me down in the bed. So I'm like just lying there naked at 30 years old, having someone wash my body for me. So there's no... Stroke is not pretty.
No.
I don't know how they make it in the movies, but there's nothing pretty about having a stroke. I remember, it was so funny. I remember that I really wanted to shave my legs. That was a super big moment to me because I hate having hairy legs. Just as an individual, that really bothers me. But so it had been like over a month in the ICU. And I was like, this is not going to work for me. And I finally kind of signaled. I mean, obviously I couldn't speak or anything. But at the end, I finally kind of signaled like to point at my leg. And they were like, ma'am, you're on blood thinners. We are not shaving your legs. And I was like, strokes ruined everything. I just want clean shaven legs. That's it.
Right.
But you gain a lot of humility in those moments. And once again, you really figure out what is most important in life. And although I would go to wager that clean shaven legs are really high on the priority list, they are definitely nowhere near the top for what is actually important.
Right. But it's all those little things that get to our sense of identity. And I gotta say, biting the inside of your mouth, and that there's something to celebrate there in being able to flip the tray.
Yes, there is. I think there is a moment, and once again, that you just learn to celebrate everything. You really do, because the human body is absolutely fantastic and frustrating and confusing, but amazing all at the same time. And when you can do anything, good or bad, that you cannot do the day before, that is progress.
So what was your favorite memory from your rehab experience? I mean, we can talk about all the frustrating stuff and all the stuff that makes it so hard, but there is light that happens in those times. What's sort of your favorite memory from that time?
When I could write my name again, my full name, all 4 letters of my full name, I really felt like it was going to be okay. Because For me, I felt like that was my identity. Just getting that back of like being able to, I couldn't tell someone who I was at that point, but I could write my name if they asked. And for me, that was just so calming. And that truly felt like I was going to be fine. That didn't necessarily mean that, but in my stroke jaded mind at that moment, that meant that. Another really cool and amazing moment was when I was in occupational therapy. And this was a little later on in my treatment. And I'm sure the listeners know kind of what old school whack-a-mole is from the arcade days when we had arcades. That doesn't seem to be a thing any longer. But it's kind of like whack-a-mole in a vertical version. So it's this long wall that is standing up, and part of the OT is whenever the individual light lights up, so there are different patterns, you're supposed to smack it. And it's kind of like an easy button that you're supposed to smack. And I have been trying at that stupid machine for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I just thought, why can my body not smack this stupid light fast enough? It's driving me crazy. And then one day I went in and I was like, today is the day. Today is the day that I'm going to be able to move my body fast. I'm going to be able to process and recognize what is lighting up quickly. I'm going to be able to move my body in a way that is efficient and proficient to my goal. And this is going to happen. And I said that to myself before I went in, and I said that to my therapist. And I think my therapist was like, okay, Jeri, like, I want that for you, but I also don't want you to get discouraged when if you cannot succeed in that self-proclaimed mission that you have for yourself. So I did it. And I looked at my therapist and I think we were both just shocked. Like, it wasn't pure joy. It was just shock. Like, I really just did that. And then after a couple moments, we both started bawling our eyes out because we were just so overwhelmed with I succeeded at the game of wall whack-a-mole, and it was amazing. And those little moments when you feel like you can actually succeed at something after having everything taken away from you, that is in the moments that stroke patients and stroke survivors live for.
I know one of my OTs, one of her favorite moments in working with me was we were doing arm exercises, basically sort of like snow angels. And she was sort of helping me move my arm as she was on her little rolling stool. And something just clicked and engaged, and I suddenly had the ability to move my arm, and I yanked it, and I almost knocked her off the stool and onto the floor. And that
she wasn't expecting it.
No, she wasn't. And she was just absolutely thrilled with that. I mean, there are very few professions in the medical field when you can just about accidentally hit your provider and they get thrilled instead of angry.
Yeah. And I remembered one time I had a nurse, and my husband tried to tell her that catheters do not work well with my body. My body does not kind of navigate that foreign object very well. And so I would constantly have a lot of bleeding, etc. And we told my nurse that, and she said, okay, well, the doctor ordered this. So obviously I'm at the doctor's will and mercy at this point. So we put it in and we agreed. And then about an hour later, I was in so much pain. And she came in and she said, forget it. I am taking this thing out. I can tell you're miserable. And I remember a moment that we kind of laugh about now because we're all good friends, is there are very, very few people that can put a catheter in you that you still like at the end of the day. And for me, she is that person. I love her. I love her. She has seen way too much of me, probably more than she wants to. But medical professionals, I have so much newfound respect for the work that nurses, doctors, all the therapists, surgeons, all the work that they do. And I'm just so appreciative of them for putting up with myself and for also doing, in my opinion, the world's most difficult and time-consuming and frustrating job. So they mean the world to me. They really do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how long was it before you were able to live at home again?
So I would say about 2 months total time.
Okay.
But I was in intensive speech and occupational and physical therapy, obviously, for hours a day, every day. So that was my full-time job.
Sure.
And they ended up letting me go home from the step-down unit because they said I had a full-time caregiver. Once again, a lot of people do not have that opportunity, and that makes life a little bit more difficult. It doesn't make it impossible, it just makes it more difficult. And so my husband was actually able to work his job and stay home with me to actually drive me to all my appointments, and which there were so many every single day. I was exhausted by the end of the day. But so it was a long time, but for me, being able to be home made me feel a little bit more normal and a little bit more safe and secure, and like I had hope to kind of move forward. So I'm very, very grateful that I was actually able to go home so soon.
Right. So, I mean, when you did get home, what sort of level of disability did you have at that point? I mean, obviously, you were still going through therapy to get past that, but
yeah, I mean, my husband was so happy to shower me and kind of put me in and out of bed every day and give me my medications and those dreaded Lovenox shots. He still had to do those every single day as well, twice a day. So really, I was truly just a couch potato. There's no difference in between myself in the ICU and myself at home, other than that I was stable medically, that they felt comfortable with me being home. As far as my abilities, there was no physical difference for a long time. But luckily, with a lot of therapy, I was getting a little bit better every day.
And so where are you at today then? Obviously,
well,
your aphasia is mostly gone.
For the most part, I do still have some delayed aphasia. I remember that if you would tell me to name 10 articles of clothing, I could name one. Obviously, I can do a lot more than that now, but I do still have some delays, which I think will always be there, but that is okay. I'm not worried about that at this point.
Right. And as we're talking, it's also in the morning for both of us too, which probably makes it a little bit easier.
Oh, yeah. When it needs to be about 8 p.m., which is my bedtime pretty much, I start to fade pretty quickly. I definitely have the nighttime stroke symptoms. But I still have dysarthria, which is obviously delay in my jaw muscles. So if you could see me, I do have a little physical delay that is evident, but it mostly affects my speech and the ability to not sound drunk when I'm talking at 9 a.m., especially at work, which is kind of confusing to explain to people sometimes.
Sure.
I do have sensory processing disorder, which is probably my most severe delay and disability at this point. But I manage that because I want to live as normal as a life as possible, whatever that truly means. And just a day to day, every day is something new. I learn something new every single day about myself and Jeri 2.0 and what she needs versus Jeri 1.0 and what she needed. And it's just a different life situation every single day that I kind of navigate and conquer.
And that's thinking about it as 2.0 versus 1.0. That absolutely does help and does make a difference, because it's a new life. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a worse life. I know many in the survivors community find their new life to be frustrating with the disabilities, but ultimately where they are now is in a better place in many respects.
For sure. I love and appreciate my new life, probably even more than my first life. I feel like I'm a more patient person because you have to be when you can't do anything but move your eyes. I'm a more grateful person because I lost everything in the matter of a few seconds, and I just appreciate life more. But I'm also doing things that I never thought that I would do. I just passed a state law and I'm working on a federal stroke law. And I never imagined that I, even pre-stroke, would be passing laws. That's kind of crazy concept. But especially, when they said that I would likely be in a vegetative state, and now I'm working the world and speaking with survivors all over the world and hosting survivor groups all over the world and working on a national level. I feel like my life is so much more fulfilling now than it ever has been.
You're doing that, you're living this new life, and now, whereas you were Mrs. Ohio before, now you are Mrs. Ohio International, heading to the Mrs. International pageant. And I know we've had Miss Wheelchair USA on the show before, Marsha Schmidt, a couple years back. I've talked on my other show about public speaking. We had a former Miss Nevada, Hillary Billings, on talking about her pageant experience. Can you tell us a little bit about these different pageants, how they're structured, the international versus the regular, because this is sort of going way over my head?
Well, just to make you feel a little more normal, you're actually in the majority of people who have no idea how these things work. We are a very, very small group of individuals. We are a mighty group of individuals, but we are a small group. So just to kind of put it out there in the shortest, sweetest kind of terms, there are hundreds and hundreds of pageant systems. And so a lot of times people only hear about the Miss USA and the Miss America and the Miss Universe even. Those are kind of the top three ones that everyone has heard about or seen on TV as they're flipping through channels, etc.
And often we forget that Miss America is different from Miss USA.
Yeah, absolutely. So every single system that is out there in the world has different requirements. It has different areas of competition, and it has different emphasis. So with that being said, every system is kind of like its own little state. Every state has its own laws that is very particular to that area. The pageant world is the exact same thing. So you can kind of think of it as a ginormous country with each of these individual states being a different system of pageant. And so just bringing it back to what people know with the American system, you have talent in the American system, a talent portion of competition with people sing and dance and act and that kind of thing. And the USA system, there is no talent competition. So that's just as a visual difference for people. But as international, as Mrs. Ohio International 2021, the international system is all about family and about platform. And so obviously, I don't know if you can tell or not, but I have a very, very strong passion for stroke stroke awareness, and stroke prevention. And so my platform is actually called Stroke of Luck because from my story, from my symptoms, I got very, very lucky. But not everyone gets as lucky as I did. And so I utilize my platform. I'm currently working in 24 countries now about how to educate people on stroke, stroke prevention, stroke signs and symptoms, and then also the laws or legal regulations in those individual countries to help people to get to the appropriate hospitals, to get the help they need, but also to help them post-stroke with finding the recovery services they need and finding funding for the recovery, speech, occupational, and physical therapy as well.
How do you become then Miss Ohio International? Or Mrs. Ohio International, excuse me.
Yeah, you're fine. So there is a couple of different ways, a couple of different processes. So you can compete for a state title, which is just a normal pageant that you think of on TV, and a new title holder is crowned. But if your state does not have a pageant, then you go through an interview process where multiple, however many people that would like to vie for the title, they go through an interview process that is kind of like a 2 or 3 step interview, and then someone is selected. So it kind of just depends what state that you live in or what country you live in, because this is an international pageant. So there are people from all over the world coming to Kingsport, Tennessee next week to compete for this title of Mrs. International.
Wow. So, do you know how many countries are going to be represented?
Yeah, so there are 70 people total in this competition, and there are, I think, 15 different countries this year. It kind of changes every single year as far as who can come. Obviously, COVID had a lot to do with that.
Sure.
And it's still affecting the numbers as well because some countries cannot travel to and from. But it's magical. Like, I don't know how to explain it to people who do not understand pageants. And I know it's kind of a foreign concept to understand, but each of these people that are competing have a platform, and they are strong, and they're so intelligent, and they are working and truly, truly changing the world. And to be in a room of people from all over the world who are making a massive difference is just such an inspiring moment. It truly is.
So the winner of this competition, what does that next year look like?
Well, it looks like what you make it out to be. And so ideally, the winner will have a plan for what she would like for her year of service to be like. But truly, based on her platform and based on what is important to her, she will be traveling the world and influencing on her platform. So, for instance, obviously, my plan is to travel to these countries and work on stroke transportation and regulation laws. Also, utilizing my platform, I'm going to be educating and implementing different survivor groups in different parts of the world that may not have the opportunity to have a gathering of individuals. And then also educating on signs and symptoms through my platform as well. So everyone has their own version of what they would like their year to look like. And it's really beautiful because there are a million different possibilities for the impact that this individual can make.
Wow. So, so when you're talking about transport and different laws, were you involved with the recent Ohio state legislation regarding patient stroke transportation?
Sure was, absolutely. So, Senate Bill 21, which is now a state law, I helped to work that law and also to testify for that law. And it's just been such a blessing to ensure that stroke patients can get to the best hospital suited for their need versus the closest hospital to their area. And so I'm actually working on that law in almost every single state that does not have that. So I am taking Ohio. That was kind of like my baby to see what would happen here and see how people would react to that and what some of the criticism would be. That way I can figure out a way to overcome that criticism in other states. But yeah, I was, and I just feel so happy that we're going to be able to save thousands of lives every single year because of this law that has passed.
I mean, that's why when we talk about be fast, the instruction is to call an ambulance, because an ambulance can get you to the right hospital versus driving
Correct.
Yourself, or in your case, when your husband drove you to the local hospital and it wasn't the right hospital.
Correct. Yeah, and we had no idea. And
no, of course
we
not.
don't.
It's not your job to know.
We don't obviously. For sure. We don't obviously expect people, everyday people like myself, to know which hospitals are best suited for what kind of emergency. But we do pay people to know that expertise. And so by equipping those people with more funding so that we can educate them further and provide them with the resources that they need to do their job in the best way possible, that's what this law is truly all about. And I do encourage people, if you're listening, especially if you're within the United States, to look up what hospitals are A hospitals. They're ABC. A hospitals are the best suited hospitals for severe stroke and stroke needs. And so, my number one priority is to encourage you to call 911 and do not do what we did and drive yourselves. That is an awful idea. But if for some reason that I can't think of right now that you need to know what hospital is most appropriate, having that knowledge in your back pocket is not ever going to be a bad thing.
You want to be able to know which are the comprehensive stroke centers. And I think one of the things that sets those apart is that those are the ones that are equipped to do things like mechanical thrombectomy 24/7.
Correct. Yeah. And I think it's very, very important to understand what hospitals kind of suit a stroke survivor's or stroke patient at that point needs. It's really going to come down to time, because I know that you preach this all the time as well, but brain is time when it comes to stroke. So do not hesitate to obviously call 911 to get help. But when a stroke is happening, having all the information that you can possibly obtain before a stroke happens is truly going to make the outcome the best outcome possible.
Because once it's happening, you're already going through the brain damage. That's not really when you want to start learning.
Correct. I mean, it's never too late to learn. I just don't know how much that you will comprehend in those moments of trauma and fear. But
when you're already ordering engineering to divert all system resources to life support.
Yeah, exactly. More power to you. I was just trying to move my body, but if you're able to, to learn some physics and when you're having a stroke, and then I applaud you on your efforts.
So what's the difference then between the Mrs. Ohio program and the Mrs. Ohio International program?
Yeah. So Mrs. Ohio America is not a platform-based program. So truly that pageant is more of community service-based information. So you do not have to have a platform for that system. You can just feel passionate about community service and wanting to serve your area. And then, of course, like we said previously, international is all about having your thing. What makes your world tick and what brings you the most joy and the bigger impact of the bigger picture that you can make. So that is the main difference. Obviously, for the Mrs. system, you do have to be married. And then obviously there are other effects that you have to be 18 or older. I think it goes up to 65. This is my last pageant, so I will not be exploring pageants at 65 if I make it to that age. So I never worried too much about the max age. But that is the main, I would say, difference.
So it's interesting. So it's a little bit of a different focus there. Now, one of the things you mentioned there, obviously for the Mrs. system, you have to be married, and for the Mrs. International system, it's pretty specific. It says in the rules that she must be a naturally born female married to a naturally born male. So trans folks need not apply, and people who are gay need not apply for this program either. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question to ask, especially because the first ever trans woman won, I think it was Miss MISS Nevada, USA. So the first trans individual is going to Miss USA for the first time in history.
Wow.
So I think it's funny. Once again, that's not really national news because we're really so niche. But that was really a defining moment to us of history and really the way times are changing. So what I've learned throughout this process, as a title holder, as a pageant holder, also as a married straight individual who now lives in Dayton, Ohio, which is really a progressive city, but growing up in Emory, Virginia, which is a really, really conservative area of Virginia, I've learned that there are special systems for special situations. So although the international system does not allow, practically in general terms, a gay individual to compete or a trans individual to compete, there are so many systems that do. And so I like to reserve the right for individuals to be different and to feel comfortable in their own skin and in their own system. So for me, I personally am okay with a trans individual competing, but I'm also perfectly fine with a gay individual competing as well, because I think there's beauty in every single person and every single situation. But I do love and respect the right for the international system specifically to have its own rules and regulations for a natural born woman to be married to a natural born male as well.
When you start getting international, it becomes really interesting with all of the different international, different countries' laws and everything around that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so in some situations it could almost, it's dangerous a lot of times in the United States to be a trans woman or trans man or even a gay man or gay woman. But I think in other countries, dangerous is an understatement for what that looks like. And so although we have a lot of work to do here in the United States, I think you could be severely persecuted in other countries as well for choices that you made or for feelings and identities that you identify with as well.
Right. Absolutely. And a lot of countries will actually just sort of criminalize who you are based on that. So the other thing I wanted to ask about, of course, is the Lemonade Project, because you've got this just amazing bright yellow website with this lovely all matching aesthetic. I mean, it looks fantastic. So what is the Lemonade Project?
I appreciate that. Those kind words.
Because you're not
So,
involved in enough projects.
I mean, that's a side statement. We're not going to worry. We're not going to worry about that. So it all kind of comes together with my beautiful chaos that I mentioned earlier. So the Lemonade Project was actually something that I created in speech therapy. I said, if I'm going to learn how to read and write again, I'm going to do this in a way that is impactful for other people as well. And so my speech therapist had a sign right in front of the desk that I worked at every single day that said, speak with intention. And I really took that seriously, speaking with intention. So the Lemonade Project is a stress reduction and coping skills-based organization where I implement free services such as yoga, such as meditation, walking meditation, and park services so that people can kind of ground themselves a little bit more when they're walking throughout the nature. Meditation and yoga and domestic violence shelters. And even on a worldwide scale, implementing different services and coping skill therapists in different countries, because every country has its own set of issues and stress that it deals with that may be different than what the United States deals with. So my stroke was actually caused due to stress. And so for me, I want to ensure that I help other people to develop skills that really help them to reduce their stress, preventing all kinds of long-term diseases and disabilities.
So then all about working for that stress reduction then. So I mean what are some of the accomplishments from the project that you've been most proud of so far?
I have loved implementing meditation into homeless shelters because I feel like the ACEs, which is, the stress and long-term disability related situations that happen in people's lives, such as not having a home, not having a stable living situation, not knowing where you're going to get your next food, that chronic stress and trauma literally changes the composition of your brain. And chronic stress is one of the most terrible, in my opinion, terrible aspects of not knowing what is next for yourself in all situations. So getting mindfulness and meditation into those homeless shelters and allowing those people to, despite the outside world of not knowing what is next, to reduce their stress and to be able to think more clearly and to be able to implement things like career services and interview services into those homeless shelters to help those people kind of get on their way and get on their feet and aspire for more in life. That has been a really sweet spot of my project that I've just loved participating in.
And that can be so important because excessive stress will lead to, of course, higher levels of higher blood pressure, of course, which causes stroke, can lead to much higher blood sugar levels. The body is just dumping sugar into the blood to constantly in a fight or flight type of thing, which can, of course, lead to stroke. It can lead to disrupted sleep, which can lead to stroke. And it's all those different paths to get to where nobody wants to go.
Well, and it's not even just stroke, there are things like diabetes, there are things like heart disease, there are things like the body is so beautifully interconnected that if you take care of your cortisol levels, which is obviously the stress hormone that is floating throughout your body, then you're able to prevent so many different devastating and life-altering diseases and life events that really you don't need to have happen to you that can be prevented. And It is known that 80% of strokes and also heart disease are completely preventable. And, when we're having 1 in 4 people having a stroke, that when 80% are preventable, we obviously have a lot of work to do.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. But first, I want to talk about sponsor Modus Nova. Modus Nova helps stroke survivors recover use of a stroke-affected arm or foot. The Modus hand and Modus foot are AI-controlled, air-powered robotic exoskeletons that make at-home PT and OT just more fun. I mean, survivors play video games on a touchscreen display while the Modus hand helps them move their affected hand to play those games. While you play games, you are getting in the repetitions needed for ongoing stroke recovery. To find out if Modus Nova is right for you, visit strokecast.com/Modus Nova. Use promo code STROKECAST to save 10% off your first month. And now back to Jeri Ward and our hack of the week.
I would say that I believe that whenever you are able to tell someone your situation, because not all disabilities are the same, just like not all strokes are the same, people can understand you a bit better. And so whenever I walk into a meeting, I have headphones that are sensory processing headphones, and they're just little earbuds and not anything crazy noticeable. And they're clear, not a big deal. But whenever I'm in a meeting with a lot of different people with sensory processing disorder, I always say, I have sensory processing disorder. You'll see me put my headphones in. I can still hear you. I just want to mute the sound a little bit so that I can fully concentrate on what you're saying and what I need to respond to. And it's just not a big deal. It's just letting people know that this is who I am. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. That is not my motive or objective in this conversation. But explaining that people have different life situations that call for things that may look or feel a little different, like putting headphones in the middle of a meeting, that helps people to get on your level and understand you a bit better so that they can accommodate better as well.
So this has been great. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Yes. So you can easily find me on Instagram at Mrs. Ohio INTL 2021, or you can find me at thelemonadeproject.org, and you are welcome to message me or friend me, and I will be glad to connect. It's always good to meet more survivors or more people who are interested in stroke education or stress reduction.
Fantastic. And we'll have all those links in the show notes over at strokecast.com. So Jeri, this has been an absolute delight as you are gearing up for your Mrs. International competition. Good luck. Looking forward to hearing how that turns out, and to you spreading the big words of be fast and ahora around the world.
So I appreciate you having me, and I always appreciate your support as well.
Have you checked out our sponsor, Like Minded? Like Minded is a nonprofit organization offering online classes, talks, and support group meetings that members can join live. These sessions are actually run by survivors and therapists like yourself. Can't make it to one on the schedule? No problem. Members can just tune in for the replay. Members also get access to a private text messaging group to get even more of their questions answered. Join sessions offered by folks like Jane Connolly, Joe Borges, Mimi Hayes, Tsugoyna Taverna, Kristen Aguirre, Ella Sophia, Vince Holland, Maddie Niebank, and more. Like Minded is available for just $45 a month. Learn more at strokecast.com/likeminded to find out if Like Minded is right for you. Use promo code STROKECAST for 20% off your first month. My time with Jeri just flew by, and I'm especially appreciative because she was in the middle of a hectic week preparing for the Mrs. International finals. So, how did she do? Well, she did great. Jeri came in third place and was thrilled to celebrate the victories of her other friends. Congratulations, Jeri, on a job well done, and so important to be able to talk about your platform with a broader audience. I can't wait to see what you do next. To learn more about Yolanda Stennett, the winner of Mrs. International, check out mrsinternational.com, and that link is in the show notes. One of the big themes in this discussion with Jeri is the importance of self-care. I mean, this is usually a discussion that we have about the caregivers in our lives, the people who have had their lives upended as a result of our strokes, and who are doing their best to help take care of us and help us meet our needs. The key thing we like to remind caregivers is that they can't take care of us if they are not first taking care of themselves. And this applies to stroke survivors too. I mean, as we try to help others or take on a bunch of projects or do reach out or run creative projects or return to work and pick up those obligations, I mean, we also have to take the time to refresh and recharge and to collect some more spoons if we can. Because post-stroke life is tough enough with just the stroke stuff and the extra rest that requires and the neurofatigue that causes. But when you're starting to do a lot of other things, and especially as you get further from your stroke, you start trying to help others or do more projects. And it's so important to, as we're doing those, to also take care of our own self-care. Because if we don't rest and we don't take care of our health as best we can, we'll be less able to support and participate in our own recoveries and to support the other people in our lives that we care about. This stuff always comes back to what the flight attendants tell us at the beginning of every flight on an airplane. And that's put your own oxygen mask on before helping others. Another thing that Jeri said that really struck with me was when she talked about learning what Jeri 2.0 needs every day. And I think that's something all survivors can relate to, where this new version of ourselves, we often look like the original version, even if we move differently, but we're still different and changing and evolving all the time. And we're still trying to figure out all of this stuff, often years down the road. I also think it's awesome that Jeri chose to leverage her previous background in pageants from before her stroke to craft a new message and mission in post-stroke life by diving back into the pageant world. It's like how Maggie Whittam and Michael Schutt leveraged their theater backgrounds to tell their new stories of stroke and disability. Or Craig Martin leveraged his pre-stroke musical career to raise money for stroke after surviving his 2 strokes. Or Deborah Meyerson leveraged her background as an academic author to write her book, Identity Theft. And the list just goes on. And even this show, I mean, it exists because I had an earlier podcast all about public speaking called 2-Minute Talk Tips. When I wanted to help folks learn more about stroke, starting a new podcast seemed just the right fit. And that can be a model for your own path as well. I mean, if you want to tell stories or raise awareness of stroke or teach people about stroke or really just do whatever you can to drive awareness, prevention, support recovery, whatever it is, you don't have to start from scratch. What skills do you have from before stroke? What experiences or passions did you have? And how can you leverage that background to do something new based on what you already know? The way you do it may need to change, but the key is that that's a starting point. And often that starting point is what we need most. So that's it for this week. Be sure to visit the show notes at strokecast.com/Jeri. That's JERI. Strokecast.com/Jeri. Share this episode with someone you know by giving them the link strokecast.com/Jeri, JERI, strokecast.com/Jeri. Subscribe to the free monthly Strokecast newsletter at strokecast.com/news. And of course, As always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.